Hi, everybody. Buenos días. Disculpa que no puedo hablar en catalán y mi castellano es so-so, voy a hablar más en inglés, pero entiendo el español. Es verdaderamente un placer de estar aquí, una muy buena oportunidad para conocerles, conocer la región y descubrir el Festival Euphonic. Ok, voy a ver con la técnica. Funciona. Okay, so I'm going to switch to English. Can everybody hear me all right? And just tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast in English, okay? So as I say, I come from Montreal, which is the largest city in the province of Quebec, and we have quite a Quebec delegation this year at Euphonics. I wanted to take a few moments just to situate you, also the cultural landscape that we're coming from. So Montreal is also known as Tiohtià:ke in Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk language and as Muniang in Anishinaabe language. To give you a sense, so Montreal is over here. Canada is a very big country with lots of diverse cultures within it. But the city of Montreal itself is the largest city in Quebec, the second largest city in Canada. And we primarily speak French in Montreal. There's a good portion of English speakers as well, and there's a very significant portion of allophones, so people whose native language is other than French or English. In terms of demographics, also, many of us come from European ancestry, about almost 40% of visible minorities, and we have also indigenous populations within Montreal. So this is the context that we are coming from. As I was in Barcelona, I came across this graffiti. I don't speak Catalan, but I think I understand what this means. And I think that this is a point of contact between us as Quebecers, as a French-speaking minority within North America. But also, it's a point of contact also for the indigenous peoples on whose territories we stay. And Montreal is an unceded indigenous territory, so there was never a treaty saying that we were welcome to stay there, but we are there nonetheless. So we try to remember that, and we try to give more space for indigenous languages to be more present in public sphere. So the artist-run center that I come from and that I represent is called OBORO. And we're really located in the heart of an urban district of Montreal called the Plateau Mont-réal neighborhood. Montreal is an island, and Plateau is really in the center. It's a very vibrant area. It used to be a working class area, but that's become very bourgeois, I guess, in the last years, as tends to happen when the artists go there. And now the artists are all being pushed away further out into the islands. Within our industrial building there are two other artist-run centers. ADAX, which is formerly known as Studio XX, that has a feminist mandate, media art mandate, and Groupe Intervention Vidéo, that is a distributor of independent videos by people who identify as women. So OBORO was founded in 1982, and this is the initial spirit that launched OBORO, so the idea that living transcultural artistic experiences contribute to the betterment of humankind. So the bar is very high, but we try to stay close to that mandate. It's an artist-run center, and I'll explain what that means in the Canadian context a bit more specifically, and of course we try to develop local, national, and international contexts. Our sphere of activity is quite vast, which is a bit unusual. It combines both visual and new media and digital arts, as well as performing arts at times, emerging interdisciplinary practices, and so on. So a lot of times I like to say that we like to welcome projects that wouldn't necessarily find another home easily in Montreal. But that doesn't mean that we don't also present straight visual arts, straight digital arts, and so on, as I'll try to show you. So our mandate covers both production and presentation, which means that we have facilities to exhibit works. So we have two exhibition spaces. You see one of them up top here. We have a number of multi-purpose studios, and we have a studio residence that can welcome people who are not based in Montreal. And we also have a new media lab. And our sphere of production ranges from residencies to exhibitions to various kinds of professional training, primarily in sound, audio arts, and multimedia. We also do some cultural mediation projects, so projects that try to involve the community. And we still try to do some publications, so I've sent out 2 copies of our latest publication that I'll talk about a bit more. I know that in Europe you have a strong artistic publication tradition. It's getting harder and harder in Canada to find ways to continue to make art books and to distribute them, especially. So I want to tell you, I mean, it was really interesting for me to hear and understand what I could of the presentations this morning in terms of your cultural landscape and some of the similarities in terms of challenges that we're facing in this late capitalist era, trying to decelerate, trying to move away from extractivist tendencies, but also differences in terms of the funding structures and also the governance structures in our respective cultural organizations. So in Canada, there are these entities called artist-run centers. This is a map of all the artist-run centers in Canada. It's quite vast, but you'll notice that there's kind of a high density in Quebec. And indeed, currently there are 72 members of the Regroupement des Centres d'Artistes Autogérés du Québec. So 72 artist-run centers in Quebec that have like a recognized status as such. So there's a lot going on. It's a big territory, but really the population is not that big. We're like close to 8 million, I think. So to have 72 centers is pretty good. Okay. I'm missing a slide. That's okay. So I just wanted to say that the idea of artist-run centers is really, as the name suggests, that it is run by artists. That means that artists are on the board. Artists are the primary employees. So at OBORO, we're about 10 employees currently. All of us have a practice, whether it's a curatorial practice, whether it's a practice as working artists, and our job as cultural workers is kind of rooted in that understanding of the artistic milieu. So in the artist-run center context, it's rare, but it's increasingly the case. But it's rare that you find cultural workers who are exclusively managers, let's say. It's very much grounded in a kind of a grassroots approach, and indeed, in the 60s, late 60s, within Canada, there was really a movement to secure independent spaces that would be outside of the market-driven forces, where people could continue to experiment in contemporary art practice and also have a space to present that's outside of the commercial gallery system. So while a place like OBORO certainly is becoming institutionalized in the way that you spoke of earlier this morning, there still is that spirit that animates it, and there's a sense of responsibility, I think, in the community towards emerging artists, towards independent practices, and towards trying to support the continued existence, but also vibrancy of these independent practices, again, outside the market. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our space in the hopes that you might want to come and visit us sometime. So one of the things that we can offer to international visitors is a studio residence that offers you a space to live and work. And it's within the building of OBORO, so you have access to the facilities, but you're also in the heart of a very vibrant neighborhood. We also have a production studio, so it's primarily used for our programming, but not exclusively for our programming. It's also available to our members who can rent it at reduced rates, and then it's available for non-commercial projects for people who want to rent it from outside our immediate community. But the order of priority is always programming, members, and then outside things, but we really don't want to compete in any way with the kind of more commercial production, because it's a different reality. And we're, like many artist-run centers, we're primarily funded by public funding. So we feel also there that there's a responsibility of availability, making things accessible to people. And maybe a little parenthesis to say that our reality of public funding might be a little bit different from yours. We're very fortunate in Montreal to have access to municipal city funding, provincial, Quebec funding, and also Canadian funding, federal funding. And I will just say that one of the principles in public art funding in Canada is the idea of arm's length. So it means that the government cannot directly have a say in the choices that are made. The way that projects are selected for funding is through a system of peers. So it's the community that decides who gets the funding, who is worthy to retain the funding, and so on. And this is precisely to avoid issues of censorship, issues of abuses of power, and so on. We have a sound studio, so sound is also a very dear area of production and presentation at OBORO. So you have the possibility to do post-production, recordings, and so on. And the types of projects that we have in residence are usually the types of projects that would benefit from accessing the specific resources that we can offer. And finally, we have a smaller post-production studio. There's other places in Montreal that have more resources to do film post-production, for example, or video post-production, but it's still possible to do so. And there are some meeting spaces as well. So often we'll also host other organizations in the city that will need to get together, have board meetings, and so on. So just a few examples of some recent works that we've presented at OBORO. So this is François Quévillon is a well-established Québécois artist who works in media and digital arts. He's been working for at least 20 years, and we were fortunate enough to present a kind of large-scale exhibition of his recent works in our 2 exhibition spaces last spring. So he works in a variety of media. Here we have one of his first VR works, I think. We have a lot of examples here of photography. He uses photogrammetry, I think that's how you say it in English, and kind of iterative video that's done through programming and so on. And the topic of this body of work was really around resource extraction in Quebec and the natural the uses of the natural landscape, and in this case it's water supplies and how there's an area where there's a lot of mining for mineral ores that make the batteries of our phones and so on, and that they're impacting the water supply or the quality of the water in neighboring regions. So these are kind of very topical subject matters relevant to all of us that are also preoccupying Quebec artists these days. More on the visual arts side recently, so just before that exhibition we had Anahita Nourouzi, who is of Iranian origin but based in Montreal. And she did a series of works all around the flower, the iris flower, which is a flower that's very representative of Iran. And she took it through different iterations, so some ink drawings, some glass sculptures, and also some digital works, some time-lapse photography. And in this particular work, it's a video installation, 4-channel, that has kind of mapped the time it takes to process immigration papers for people from different origins, depending on the color of their skin, the duration it takes, and it mapped that duration against the opening of iris flowers. And not unsurprisingly, and this is data that was taken from a research project for immigration to Canada and the US, and not unsurprisingly, it takes longer for the darker-skinned people to have their immigration papers processed than the lighter-skinned people. Our latest, one of our latest artists in residence is Elena Martin Franco, who is a Montrealer of Colombian origin. So during her stay, she created an installation that was part of a performance that she does specifically for video. When we have artists in residence, we try to have opportunities for them to present their work publicly and exchange with the public, so this was a kind of open house that we did, where Helena was able to exchange with them. In terms of the question of language presence and accessibility, just want to mention that because there is a large Spanish-speaking population in Montreal, whenever we have exhibitions that involve artists of Spanish descent, we try to also have our exhibition essays available in Spanish, because also our publics can be Spanish speakers, so we're conscious of the importance of linguistic presence in that sense as well. I wanted to also add a couple of images from Myriam Blot because she's going to be presenting at Euphonic tomorrow. So Myriam was in residence with us a couple of years ago in the height of the pandemic. So she had to do things a little bit autonomously, but in that context, she did manage to produce what she calls a kind of a hybrid still life between material form and digital form. It then got presented to the public for a few days towards the end of her residency. And finally, we have the publications which are circulating. So it's difficult to keep up with producing publications because of the labor that's involved and also the lack of infrastructure to distribute these kinds of pieces, but we still feel it's quite important that there's a record of these significant bodies of work that are also, you were talking about practices that are marginal or emerging or resistant and so on. So it's important that these remain, that the traces remain. So I'm looking for ways to continue the publication project, but you can take a look at them. And Caroline Gagné is an artist based closer to Quebec City, between Quebec City and Saint-Jean-Port-Joli, who has quite a vast body of work, also for the more or less the last 20 years, that covers sound art installation works. I wanted to bring up another project that's close to my heart and my interests, let's say. So in addition to presenting our artistic programming, and maybe also in that sense of kind of responsibility towards the larger milieu, we initiated a series a couple of years ago on questions of accessibility and how we can, as cultural institutions or organizations, how we can take small steps to try to make our programming more accessible, not just to publics, but to artists, for example, artists with disabilities, artists, deaf artists, and so on. So we teamed up with another organization that really has a disability arts mandate to create some workshops, conferences, webinars on this topic. And the idea is to have a toolkit and to start developing more accessible practices within our reach. So we have restricted means, we're not a museum, we don't necessarily have the manpower to deploy the amazing kind of accessibility measures that I saw, for example, at MACBA, really remarkable. But what can we do as small organizations? What are the little steps that we can do? So this is one of the things that has been interesting us, and we still have a lot of work to do, but we have a new series this year, and everything's archived on our YouTube playlist. And just to note, in terms of accessibility and language here again, it's available in English, but also American Sign Language, and in French and Quebec Sign Language. Finally, I wanted to just let you know that there's going to be an upcoming call for exhibition and residencies. So at OBORO, I have the role of artistic director, but we have a programming committee. And so our programming takes place largely through open calls for submissions, like this one that's going to be announced, I think, within the next couple of days. Sometimes by invitation as well. So there's a committee that deliberates and looks at all the submissions, and that's how our programming is primarily established. So the deadline will be October 30th. It's absolutely possible to apply as international applicants. The only thing that we don't have a budget for is travel, but usually there are ways to bring your own travel funding. We offer you a space to live and work, the one you saw earlier, an artist fee. That's another thing that's really important to artist-run centers in Canada, providing proper wages to artists and respecting that everybody respects minimal artist fee guidelines. So we all commit to respecting that. And then, of course, access to resources, to networking opportunities, and a public artist presentation. So you can, if you're at all interested, you can look out for our call that will be on the website very soon. And that was the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them, or if you would like to pose them now. Yeah, see. Do you need a microphone?
Hold on for a second.
For the programming, what type of programming do you do? Like, do you specialize on, I mean, I saw that you have the post-production, so you specialize more in video, sound, what kind of exhibitions you do?
All of it, but I can be more specific. So we For exhibition projects, we present finished works. So if you want to submit an exhibition either as an artist or curator, you present either a project that is finished or that is so far along that you know how it will be finished. You know the conditions of presentation. If you want to do a residency, though, you tell us where you are at in the process and what you need. And the assessment, of course, there's artistic merit, but there's also the criteria of feasibility, whether it's possible to offer the resources that are needed for the project, and the fit with our mandate. But yes, like I mentioned, our mandate is really large, everything from visual to digital arts, and the challenge is always finding a balance to be representative not only of that, but also of a variety of types of practices, a variety of generations of artists, a variety of provenances, and so on.
Do they have to relate to what's happening in Montreal or have any sort of relationship with any topic that it's of local or national interest?
It's a good question. No, I would say not absolutely, but sometimes we do welcome projects that have a larger ramification, but maybe one piece will be developed specifically for Montreal and responding to the particularities of that reality in our context. So to make it more relatable, but it's not an explicit criteria at all. But we will be welcoming a project from an artist from Ecuador later this fall, and he's really adapted the content that is an ongoing project, an archive, to the kinds of resources that he will find in Montreal during a residency that precedes his exhibition. So it's possible to do that. Okay.
Thank you, Tamar, for an amazing presentation. I have two short questions. The first one is regarding the invitation for artists, because you made that the open call, but also for artists that are invited directly from your OBORO project, how it works. And then do you make projects in collaboration with international other centers, or like, yeah, so this is my question. And I'm Maria from Ramo EU Institute, so
yes.
Thanks for coming.
So maybe I'll answer the second question first. So yeah, actually, of course, the last couple of years it's been difficult to do international cooperations, but we do have a history of doing it. We had a regular exchange with Mexico, the Laboratorio Arte Alameda, for a number of years, a curatorial exchange, so residencies. We've had, on some occasions, exhibition projects that were done in collaboration with Switzerland and France. And we and 7 other artist-run centers in Montreal took part in an exchange with Cuba a few years ago. So yes, and I think, you know, with the resources that we have in terms of having an apartment available, it's definitely something that interests us, and it's certainly more interesting to develop kind of long-term projects because you get to know each other. And then you get a better sense of what everybody needs. So yes, definitely there are some international exchanges. And in terms of the other question was for invitations. So yeah, this is a delicate, it's a delicate balance to find. I would say that the majority of the programming is very much through the open call, but sometimes when you get the open calls, there are always blind spots, there are always gaps, and that's because even if we try to be open, we're not necessarily accessible to all. Contemporary art in general is not super accessible, and even if you try to make bridges with communities and so on, they might not feel welcome or called upon to apply. Even if you open up your calls, we say you can submit your proposal in oral form, in a video form. We try to make it as accessible a platform as possible, but if as an artist you don't identify to this community, you're not going to go and submit your work. So sometimes it's a matter for the invitations of making things move, opening things up, not having it be the same group all the time. You know, it's important to shake things up. So I think that's also coherent with the discussion this morning.
How do you, how do you do it to connect directly for these artists or these communities that don't feel especially appealed by a call, or that they think, this is not for me, Because I think that this is a challenge,
Yeah,
and
well,
it's not
it's-
easy to address.
Yeah, I think you spoke about collaborations. I think collaborations, like I mentioned for the Interrogating Access project. So, you know, OBORO is not an artist-run center that has a mandate to cater to artists with disabilities specifically. But we know from social justice movements that there's the slogan, "Nothing about us without us." So we go work with people who are directly concerned and are the experts of their own experience. And then together we see how we can make bridges. But also more generally, I think it's also a temporality that is a slower temporality, and you have to kind of plant little seeds, develop relationships of trust, and after a few years that grows. In our case, we have one project that's slowly developing that started with an initial contact with a theater company, and one of their members who, it's a theater company that has a mandate for disability arts as well, and one of their members wanted to take a professional training with OBORO, so how do you create conditions where that's possible and beneficial? And then once that was done, there was a relationship of familiarity and trust, and now he's going to be coming in residence. And so slowly, you build kind of these new networks and interactions between communities. Yeah.
Thank you. More questions for Tamar? Yes? No? Maybe? So if there are no further questions, applause for her. Thank you very much. Thank you.